Remember the scene in Fight Club where Brad Pitt's character tells Edward Norton, "I make and sell soap"? Tyler Durden believed soap was the true measure of civilization. But the real author of that philosophy wasn't a fictional anarchist. It was Sigmund Freud himself, who declared that soap was the defining characteristic of a civilized person. It's hard to find any area of human history more soaked in mythology than the story of how we learned to wash ourselves. From ancient times to the very recent past, questions of hygiene meant the difference between life and death. Soap literally draws the line between what we're willing to call civilization and what we dismiss as barbarism. We picture ancient times as an era of total filth. There are hundreds of stories about queens who didn't bathe for years, about leaders who never brushed their teeth for decades. We hear tales of ancient peoples who supposedly stank so badly that everyone around them fainted. We're told that one culture couldn't climb out of the bathhouse while another wallowed in pure dirt for centuries. Today, we're going to uncover the truth behind these myths. This is the story of how soap traveled from the fire pits of ancient Sumer to your bathroom, how European civilization spent centuries sitting in filth, how Nazis allegedly made soap from Jewish victims, how colonizers tried to whiten Africans with bars of soap, and most importantly, what in all of this is real and what is pure fiction. Let's begin at the very beginning, in the cradle of civilization itself. When archaeologists excavated the ruins of Babylon, they discovered a clay tablet that was at least 4,300 years old. The recipe inscribed on it was clear. The Sumerians were already using soap to wash their clothes by then. Does this mean the ancient Sumerians invented soap? Not quite. Unlike Chinese tea, which has a clear point of origin, soap could have been invented by anyone, anywhere, long before Babylon even existed. In one form or another, soap appeared in every civilization on every continent. All you need to make soap is fat and alkali, which under the right conditions combine to create a cleaning agent. How might this discovery have happened? Picture this. Someone notices that fat dripping from roasting meat into the ashes below creates a strange new substance. Then, someone else accidentally dips a dirty animal hide into this substance. Suddenly, the hide comes clean. Congratulations. You've just invented soap. Like most early discoveries, we'll never know the exact details, no matter how many clay tablets archaeologists unearth. We simply have to accept that soap is roughly 4,500 years old, give or take a few centuries. The recipe remained stable for millennia. On the banks of the Nile, Egyptians also made soap from a mixture of fats and alkaline salts. But here's the fascinating part. The Egyptians didn't even use soap for washing clothes. They used it as medicine. Soap was applied to wounds and injuries as a healing treatment. What we know for certain is this. In the ancient world, it never occurred to anyone that soap could be used to wash hands, let alone faces. Ancient soap was liquid, a simple combination of fat and ash. The prospect of rinsing yourself with ashy water didn't appeal to anyone. People didn't wash their hands for the same reason many don't wash them today. They already seemed clean. If you can't see visible dirt, why bother? People clean themselves with anything available. Water, sand, clay, pumice stone. Anything but soap. The Old Testament speaks about the necessity of cleanliness. But when the prophet Jeremiah mentions soap, he refers to it exclusively as a laundry detergent. On the other side of the world, in China during the early centuries of our era, people invented their own soap from pig pancreas and fat. But once again, they used it only for washing clothes. The Romans were equally indifferent to soap. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder wrote that soap was invented by the Gauls, the northern barbarians beyond Roman borders. This attribution alone tells us something important. If soap had been valuable, the wise Romans would have claimed credit for inventing it themselves. Pliny used a Germanic word in his writings, sapo, from which we get the English soap and the German Seife. The myth about some mountain called Mount Sapo, where soap was supposedly discovered, pure fiction. The main ingredient in Germanic soap was tallow or fat, and barbarians used it to make their hair shine, like ancient hair gel or wax. This is how soap became a cosmetic product. Pliny was convinced that barbarians resorted to soap because olive oil, which we'll discuss shortly, was difficult to obtain beyond Roman border legions. They had to smear themselves with fat instead. Plus, barbarian soap stank terribly. Clean Romans would never have tolerated such an odor. Ancient soap was generally a foul-smelling thing. Akkadian and Sumerian recipes tried to minimize the stench by adding various aromatic herbs, but apparently to no avail. Romans had soap too, but they used it exclusively for cleaning pots and pans. So how did Romans wash themselves? Don't fall over. They used their beloved olive oil. The people who invented aqueducts and public bathhouses had a very specific understanding of hygiene. Why did Romans wash with olive oil? Today, you hear this and think it sounds insane. But ancient civilization was built on olive oil culture. In the Mediterranean, olive oil was almost as common as water. Greeks and Romans constantly added it to every dish imaginable and simply drank it straight. We're not recommending you try this with modern store-bought olive oil, even if it's labeled extra virgin. We understand using this oil on salads, but how do you wash with it? A Roman would first dip into a pool of water, then smear his body with fragrant olive oil. To remove the oil residue and dirt, he used a metal or reed scraper called a strigil. Think of it as an ancient washcloth, though we don't recommend trying this at home either. The Emperor Augustus reportedly scraped his face so vigorously with a strigil that he developed sores. Some famous athletes went so far as to bottle their used oil and sell it again for reuse. Here's another point. The difference between soap and olive oil is actually smaller than you think. Bitter olive oil contains many free fatty acids that possess emulsifying properties. In fact, modern soap is very often made from olive oil. Check the ingredients on your soap bar next time. All of this bathing took place in the famous Roman thermae, which we've discussed before. The key thing to remember is that Roman baths weren't baths in the modern sense. They certainly weren't like Russian steam saunas. People didn't steam themselves. They bathed in warm water. Hence the name, thermae, from the Greek word for heat. Roman body care practices were considered an important civic virtue in both the Republic and the Empire. A washed and shaved body was the aesthetic norm. Just walk through the Jupiter Hall at the Hermitage Museum, and it becomes immediately obvious. Moreover, cleanliness was a crucial part of Roman civilization's self-image. A Roman citizen, unlike a barbarian, was supposed to be clean. The details of ancient hygiene might seem barbaric to us now. For instance, instead of toilet paper, they used a common sponge, but overall, Romans managed to maintain themselves in decent condition, even by modern standards. This was all thanks to their water supply system. Wealthy Romans enjoyed home plumbing. Water flowed directly into their private baths through lead pipes connected to aqueducts. In Pompeii, water pipes were installed in almost every house, and wastewater was directed into sewers. Patricians could take baths almost daily. Tell that to someone living in medieval Europe, and they'd think you were insane. Although water from aqueducts didn't reach poor neighborhoods, anyone could walk to a public bathhouse. Thermae weren't some luxury reserved for the elite. The low entrance fee made them accessible to almost everyone. Children entered free. Season passes to bathing facilities were a popular item in Roman wills. That's how valuable they were. Now let's jump forward another 1,000 years. The Roman Empire is long dead. Europe is fractured among barbarian kingdoms. In the Kingdom of Jerusalem, Battles rage as crusaders make their expeditions to the Holy Land with mixed success. Many find death there, but those who manage to return home bring back strange green bars. This is Aleppo soap, made in Syria from, once again, olive oil. Of all the souvenirs crusaders dragged back from the Holy Land, soap wasn't the most impressive, but it had a greater impact on European history than anything else they brought back. Or more accurately, it had a greater impact on Europe's smell. Crusaders had much to marvel at in the Middle East. The key inheritors of ancient bathing traditions weren't the inhabitants of Europe, not even the Slavs, but Muslims. Some Roman hygiene norms survived in Byzantium, but Muslims paid far more attention to cleanliness and hygiene. This wasn't about luxury or aesthetics. It was a religious commandment. The Quran and Islamic tradition established ablution as a mandatory ritual before prayer. A Muslim must wash their hands, face, and feet. Since prayers happened 5 times daily, this meant frequent washing throughout the day. Medieval Islamic cities therefore had to maintain complex water supply systems. Public bathhouses, or hammams, became central to Islamic urban culture. The hammam combined the functions of a Roman thermae and a Russian banya. Steam rooms, hot water, massage, the whole experience. Islamic civilization didn't just preserve Roman bathing culture, they refined and perfected it. Aleppo soap became legendary throughout the Islamic world and beyond. Made from olive oil and laurel oil, it was green, pleasant-smelling, and actually worked for washing bodies, not just clothes. When crusaders discovered these bathhouses and this miraculous soap, it was a revelation. But here's the tragic irony. While the Islamic world maintained cleanliness as a religious duty, Christian Europe was descending into unprecedented filth. The fall of Rome led to the collapse of urban infrastructure across Western Europe. Those magnificent aqueducts fell into ruin. Public bathhouses disappeared. The knowledge of Roman hygiene practices faded from memory. For the next 1,000 years, Europe became synonymous with dirt, disease, and stench. Medieval Europeans rarely bathed, not because they were inherently barbaric, but because the infrastructure for bathing simply didn't exist anymore. Without running water, bathing became a monumental undertaking. You had to haul water from a well or river, heat it over a fire in your home, pour it into a wooden tub, and hope the water stayed warm long enough for everyone in the family to take their turn. By the time your turn came, the water would be cold and disgusting. But infrastructure wasn't the only problem. The Catholic Church actively discouraged bathing for spiritual reasons. Church authorities preached that concern for the body distracted from concern for the soul. Cleanliness of the soul mattered infinitely more than cleanliness of the body. Focusing too much on your physical appearance was vanity, one of the 7 deadly sins. Some saints were literally celebrated for their filth. Saint Francis of Assisi reportedly said that the dirtier his body became, the cleaner his soul would be. Stories circulated about holy men and women who never bathed for decades, wearing the same unwashed garments as badges of spiritual purity. The smell of sanctity, they called it. Medieval medical theory, inherited from ancient Greek medicine, also worked against bathing. Doctors believed that water opened the pores of the skin, allowing diseases to enter the body. Hot water was especially dangerous. The Black Death, which killed between 75 and 200 million people across Eurasia in the 14th century, reinforced these fears. Public bathhouses, where they still existed, were blamed for spreading the plague. Many cities shut down their bathhouses entirely. The irony, of course, is that lack of hygiene contributed massively to plague transmission. Rats and fleas thrived in the filthy conditions of medieval European cities. But medieval people couldn't see this connection. They thought bathing made disease worse, so they stopped bathing. By the Renaissance, Wealthy Europeans had developed elaborate strategies to avoid washing. Instead of bathing, they changed their linen undergarments frequently. The theory was that the linen absorbed sweat and dirt from the skin. If you changed your shirt often enough, you didn't need to wash your body. Perfume masked odors. White lead powder covered blemishes and created the pale complexion that signified nobility. Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe and Russia, bathing traditions remained strong. The Russian banya, or steam bath, was a weekly ritual for people of all social classes. Travelers from Western Europe to Russia were shocked to find that even peasants bathed regularly. They viewed this as bizarre, excessive, even sinful. The contrast couldn't be starker. While Europeans avoided water, Russians embraced steam. While European aristocrats powdered themselves with toxic lead cosmetics, Russian peasants scrubbed with birch branches in hot steam rooms. The stereotype of filthy Eastern barbarians versus clean Western civilization was exactly backward. The green bars of Aleppo soap that crusaders brought back did gradually change European attitudes, but very, very slowly. Soap production began in Mediterranean cities like Marseille and Venice, copying the Syrian techniques. These soaps became luxury products for the wealthy, but most Europeans still didn't use them for personal hygiene. It took the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment to begin changing minds. In the 17th and 18th centuries, doctors started questioning the old medical theories. Maybe water doesn't cause disease. Maybe cleanliness actually prevents it. Maybe, just maybe, bathing is good for you. But old prejudices die hard. Even in the 19th century, many Europeans bathed only a few times per year. Queen Victoria's England, despite all its technological advancement, was notoriously dirty. London's Thames River was essentially an open sewer. The Great Stink of 1858, when the smell of raw sewage in the Thames became so overwhelming that Parliament couldn't meet, finally forced London to build a proper sewage system. The Industrial Revolution brought soap production into the modern era. Chemical innovations made soap cheaper, more pleasant smelling, and more effective. Advertising campaigns promoted soap as a symbol of respectability and social advancement. Factory-made soap became affordable for working-class families for the first time in history. And then something even more powerful than advertising or infrastructure convinced humanity to wash: imperialism and colonialism. European powers in the 19th and early 20th centuries were carving up Africa, Asia, and the Pacific Islands among themselves. They justified this conquest with the ideology of the civilizing mission. Europeans, they claimed, had a duty to bring civilization to the backward peoples they colonized. Soap became a key symbol of this so-called civilization. European companies exported soap to colonies and marketed it as a tool for transforming dirty natives into clean citizens. The racial subtext was explicit and horrifying. Soap could supposedly whiten dark skin, washing away not just dirt, but racial difference itself. British soap companies like Peers produced advertisements showing white children teaching black children how to use soap, with the black children's skin miraculously lightening after washing. American soap ads depicted Native Americans or Mexicans as dirty and uncivilized before discovering soap. The message was clear. White Europeans were clean and civilized, while colonized peoples were dirty and barbaric. Soap would bridge this gap. This was, of course, grotesque racist propaganda. Many colonized peoples had sophisticated hygiene practices long before Europeans arrived. But the soap companies and colonial administrators ignored these traditions. Soap became part of the package of civilization alongside railways, Christianity, and Western education. The cynical truth was that soap manufacturers saw colonies as massive new markets. They wrapped profit-seeking in the language of moral uplift and racial improvement. And it worked. Soap sales exploded globally. Companies became wealthy beyond imagination. Meanwhile, back in Europe and America, people were finally starting to wash regularly. But why? Not because of advertising alone. Death convinced them. When World War I broke out in 1914, hundreds of thousands died in the first year. But by 1918, the war had stopped being the only global threat. Soldiers were being cut down by the deadly Spanish flu, the predecessor to COVID-19. The Spanish flu pandemic was catastrophic. Conservative estimates put the death toll at 50 million people worldwide, though some historians believe it was closer to 100 million. Unlike most flus, which primarily kill the elderly and infants, Spanish flu killed healthy young adults in their prime. Victims would feel fine in the morning and be dead by evening, drowning in their own blood as their lungs filled with fluid. Medical authorities quickly realized that preventing infection required thorough washing of hands, face, and neck. Basically, everything that came into contact with the outside world. Soap companies had been waiting for exactly this moment. An intensive propaganda campaign began, promoting soap with the same urgency and intensity as mask-wearing campaigns during COVID-19 100 years later. Newspaper headlines screamed, "Want to live? Buy soap. Wash with soap, save your loved ones." Public health posters appeared everywhere, showing the connection between dirty hands and death. For the first time in history, hand washing became a universal public health recommendation backed by government authority. It helped that soap no longer stank like ancient times. Chemical processes had purified it of impurities, and synthetic fragrances made it pleasant to use. The barriers to adoption had finally fallen. The campaign worked. From that point forward, nobody doubted the benefits of soap. The Russian poet Vladimir Mayakovsky summed it up in 1920. Dirty hands threaten disaster. To keep disease from breaking you down, be cultured. Before eating, wash your hands with soap. If World War I and the Spanish flu made soap respectable and absolutely necessary for survival, World War II seriously damaged its reputation. Because during that war, instead of animal and vegetable fats, soap production allegedly began using human beings as raw material. Or did it? Let's examine this horrifying story carefully. March 1945. The Red Army entered the Baltic city of Danzig, now called Gdansk, not far from Kaliningrad, Poland. As the new Polish authorities began inventorying property left behind by fleeing Germans, a doctor named Wincenty Niezabatowski and his colleague Bajkowski examined the facilities of the Anatomical Institute. The Germans had abandoned it in January, but hundreds of corpses and body parts remained in the morgue. The scene was nightmarish. Laboratory equipment, human remains, chemicals, books and papers were scattered everywhere. Nothing unusual for a morgue, perhaps, especially one abandoned in chaos. But the most shocking discovery wasn't the corpses themselves. It was lumps of whitish-gray mass. Former Institute employees revealed that this was allegedly remnants of soap made from human fat. Bajkowski and Niezabatowski immediately reported this to journalists. In May, the local newspaper published a shocking article, "Discovery in Danzig Institute, Germans made soap from people." According to the report, prisoners from Polish concentration camps, Jews and Slavs, had been transported to Danzig for this purpose. On May 28th, a Soviet investigative commission, led by the military prosecutor of the Second Belarusian Front, interrogated a man named Zygmunt Mazer. He claimed he had received a recipe for making soap from the Institute's director, Professor Rudolf Spanner. Mazer stated that he personally prepared soap from human fat following this recipe. washed with it himself, and gave some to his mother for laundry. In early July, foreign journalists interviewed Mazar, and he repeated his statements. On July 13th, the English-language newspaper Soviet News published an exposé. The next day, Mazar died, most likely from typhoid fever. The Soviet delegation used Mazar's testimony along with samples of the alleged soap at the Nuremberg International Military Tribunal. British prisoners of war and Gdansk residents came forward with corroborating statements about soap making from corpses. The press across Europe eagerly reported the story. A theory spread that German wartime soap labeled RIF was made from Jewish victims. The acronym allegedly stood for Pure Jewish Fat in German. RIF soap bars were common in liberated territories, still being sold in stores. In some places, hysteria erupted with demands to stop selling this soap. A current historical consensus is this: while such experiments may have occurred, the Nazis did not succeed in putting human soap production into industrial operation. Thank God for that. What's interesting is that rumors about Nazi experiments circulated throughout the war. The first such accusations against Germans appeared in 1917 during World War I. From 1942 onward, these rumors spread in regions of Poland where death camps existed. American press wrote about it in 1943. Solomon Mikoils, head of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee, brought a bar of soap with him during his fundraising tour of the United States in 1943, saying, "Look, here are our brothers." The scandal around Danzig soap and soap allegedly made from Holocaust victims became part of collective memory about that terrible war. Millions of school children worldwide are still taught about Gdansk and Professor Spanner. Until recently, Polish museums displayed samples of soap supposedly made from Polish victims by Germans. The events are utterly horrifying, and it's understandable why people believe the soap story. Personally, I wouldn't be surprised by anything. I've researched Nazi medical experiments and Japan's Unit 731. I know what experiments were conducted. I absolutely believe that these developments and productions were carried out by the Germans, based on testimony of other crimes documented at Nuremberg and confirmed repeatedly. Soap making from humans fits perfectly into that terrible list. But whatever the truth about wartime soap, the scandal in Gdansk made peacetime soap even more successful than before. Personal hygiene gradually became the norm and a mandatory element of government public health policy. The first television commercial in history was dedicated to soap. Soap companies funded early TV programs, which became known as soap operas. The name stuck. This was another massive media success for soap manufacturers, who had started by selling bars to soldiers during the American Civil War and ended up as massive multinational brands. From the second half of the 20th century onward, homes worldwide filled with new types of soap: shower gels, shampoos, liquid hand soap. It's hard for us to imagine how Romans could wash with olive oil alone, or how medieval peasants sometimes didn't wash at all. We're ready to endlessly speculate about how dirty people were in the past, how they smelled, how anyone could live in such absurd conditions. But ultimately, humanity reached the point where soap is no longer up for discussion. It's the most natural norm of life, necessary for survival. Remember during COVID-19 how everyone debated about masks, gloves, and vaccines? Now try to remember even one heated debate about soap. There wasn't one. Nobody questioned whether we should wash our hands. From the clay tablets of ancient Babylon to the horror of Auschwitz, from Roman luxury to medieval filth. From colonial exploitation to pandemic necessity, soap has traced the entire arc of human civilization. It's a story of progress and regression, of science and superstition, of empire and resistance. The bar of soap in your bathroom connects you to 4,500 years of human struggle for cleanliness, health, and dignity. Every time you wash your hands, you're participating in a ritual that once defined the boundary between civilization and barbarism, between life and death. Today we take soap for granted. We can't imagine life without it. And perhaps that's the greatest victory of all, that something once rare, expensive, and controversial has become so universal that we never think twice about it. Soap is no longer a symbol of civilization. It's simply part of being human. The journey from Sumerian fire pits to your sink took 45 centuries. Billions of lives were lost to diseases that soap could have prevented. Wars were fought. Empires rose and fell. And through it all, the simple combination of fat and alkali slowly, painfully transformed human existence. Sigmund Freud was right. Soap is a measure of civilization, not because clean people are superior to dirty people, but because the story of soap is the story of humanity learning, forgetting, and relearning one of the most basic truths, that cleanliness protects life. And now, finally, after thousands of years of resistance, denial, and catastrophe, we've learned that lesson. We wash our hands. We use soap. We live longer, healthier lives because of it. The battle for cleanliness has been won. The only question that remains is, what other basic truths are we still refusing to accept? What other simple solutions are we resisting today that future generations will look back on with the same disbelief that we feel about medieval anti-bathing propaganda? Those are questions worth thinking about the next time you reach for a bar of soap. History isn't just about the past. It's about recognizing patterns, learning from mistakes, and hopefully, eventually, getting things right. Wash your hands. Remember the 45 centuries it took for humanity to figure out that simple truth. And be grateful we finally did.